1. The return to a sacred space. The morning sun filtered through the olive trees as the papal motorcade quietly ascended the winding roads of the Alban Hills, about 25 kilometers southeast of Rome. The destination was Castel Gandolfo, the papal summer residence that once stood as a symbol of opulence, retreat, and tradition. For decades, it was a place of solace for popes weary from the burdens of Rome, yet under Pope Leo XIV, it had remained unused, a silent monument to a past many believed the Church had left behind. Use 5 seconds of your time to subscribe, like, comment and share for more videos. That changed on a cool spring morning in 2025, when Pope Leo XIV, with little fanfare, stepped onto the grounds of Castel Gandolfo once more. His decision to return was not about luxury or rest. It was a deeply symbolic act, one that resonated far beyond the walls of the Apostolic Palace. For the global Church, it marked not merely a visit, but a spiritual and pastoral recalibration. It was a declaration that humility must live side by side with tradition, and that leadership must sometimes walk the paths of history to illuminate the future. Part 2, A Place of Memories and Meanings. Castel Gandolfo is not merely a residence. It is steeped in papal legacy. First used by Pope Urban VIII in the 17th century, the villa served as a sanctuary for generations of popes. Pope Pius XII used it as a refuge during World War II, sheltering Jewish families and civilians from Nazi persecution. Pope John Paul II walked its gardens in prayer and contemplation. Pope Benedict XVI famously retired there in 2013, briefly disappearing from the world stage after his resignation, the first in nearly 600 years. Under Pope Francis, however, Castel Gandolfo was open to the public, symbolizing transparency and the shift away from papal privilege. The residence became more of a museum than a retreat. The Vatican seemed to quietly close the chapter on its use as a spiritual sanctuary for the papacy. But Pope Leo XIV, always a surprise, turned the page once again. 3. The humble leader's approach. Unlike his predecessors, Pope Leo XIV arrived not in full papal regalia, but in the simple white cassock he's become known for. There were no televised addresses, no waving from balconies. Instead, there was prayer, walking, listening, and silence. The Holy Father's first stop was the Church of St. Thomas of Villanova in the town square, where he knelt and prayed alone for over 20 minutes. Observers noted the unusual stillness of the moment. He did not make any formal speech. Rather, it was the silence itself that spoke volumes. Vatican insiders later confirmed that the Pope had prayed specifically for priests under persecution, mothers contemplating abortion, the elderly abandoned by society, and leaders tempted by power. It was a profound invocation. A deeply human cry to heaven on behalf of the voiceless. 4. Meeting the townspeople. Breaking from papal security protocols. Pope Leo XIV walked through the narrow cobbled streets of Castel Gandolfo, engaging directly with the townspeople. Local shopkeepers were stunned. Children ran out to greet him. Elderly men and women bowed as he passed, some in tears. One woman, 84-year-old Maria Teresa, clutched his hand and whispered, "You are the first pope to look me in the eyes since I was a child." Leo replied, "I do not look as a pope. I look as a brother." The pope then entered a modest home unannounced. It belonged to a retired gardener who once tended the Apostolic Palace grounds under Pope Paul VI. They shared a humble meal of bread, olives, and lentil soup. For Pope Leo XIV, the moment captured what he calls the gospel of encounter, a church that lives among the people, not above them. 5. The hidden message. Though the visit lacked the grandeur of past papal events, Vatican analysts and theologians quickly began to see the layers of intentional symbolism. In returning to Castel Gandolfo, Pope Leo XIV was not reclaiming its past glory, but redeeming it for a new mission. In his only written statement about the visit, released later that week, the Pope wrote, "We must not fear the halls of history, but transform them with the breath of mercy and justice." Castel Gandolfo was once a refuge for popes. Now let it become a beacon of pastoral hope for the wounded world. This line sparked theological and ecclesiastical debate. Was Leo XIV signaling a renewed purpose for the site? Was he encouraging a return to spiritual retreat for church leaders in a time of global crisis? Or was he offering a quiet criticism of the Church's growing bureaucratic coldness? The answer, perhaps, is all of the above. 6. A Church Reawakening. Many within the Vatican Curia interpreted the visit as part of Leo XIV's broader vision for church reform, a vision not rooted in documents alone, but in symbolic action. The Pope has long stressed that church leaders must lead with their feet, speak with their hands, and pray with their hearts. Already, some seminaries have begun discussing the use of Castel Gandolfo for spiritual formation retreats. A Jesuit cardinal close to the Pope hinted at the possibility of transforming the villa into a center for silent discernment, particularly for bishops and cardinals preparing for future conclaves. Catholic youth groups have also expressed interest in using the site for interfaith retreats, following Pope Leo XIV's recent push for cross-religious dialogue based on shared human dignity rather than dogmatic competition. 7. Global reactions. The Pope's quiet return to Castel Gandolfo made global headlines, not because of drama or controversy, but because of its authentic humility. Religious and secular leaders alike praised the gesture. Archbishop of Canterbury Justin Welby tweeted, "In a world-chasing performance, Pope Leo XIV walks the path of presence. His visit to Castel Gandolfo is a sermon without words." Even world leaders took notice. The President of Italy offered to support efforts to preserve the spiritual legacy of the site. Meanwhile, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Religion and Belief issued a statement commending the Pope's silent diplomacy of peace. Social media lit up with images of the Pope walking quietly in the gardens, pausing before statues of past saints and martyrs. Hashtags like #HumbleLeadership, #Castel Gandolfo, and #Leo XIV moment trended for days. 8. A legacy in the making. This was not just a visit. It was a moment of intentional redefinition. Pope Leo XIV showed that even the oldest spaces of power can be reimagined as spaces of service. Castel Gandolfo, long thought a relic of papal luxury, was baptized anew as a symbol of pastoral simplicity and spiritual proximity. The Holy Father may not return again to Castel Gandolfo during his pontificate. But his footsteps, his prayer, and his silent witness have already changed what it means. As one Vatican observer wrote, "When Pope Leo XIV walked through Castel Gandolfo, he did not bring the Church back to the past. He brought the past forward, into the arms of the poor, the tired, and the hopeful." 9. The personal dimension. Pope Leo XIV's private reflection. Behind the carefully composed public gestures of any pope lies a personal world, a spiritual interiority known only to God and, on occasion, revealed in whispers through diaries, confessions, or letters. Pope Leo XIV, known for his poetic sermons and handwritten notes, left behind a brief but poignant entry in his personal journal following his visit to Castel Gandolfo. According to a trusted source in the papal household, the Pope wrote the following words late that night, seated in the modest papal quarters overlooking Lake Albano. "I walked through their memories today, the memories of popes who bore the weight of the world, of laity who knelt in war and famine, of saints who passed through these olive trees in silent agony and joy. I do not deserve this soil. But perhaps the soil has forgiven us." This moment reveals the contemplative depth of a pope who does not see himself as ruler, but as caretaker of a wounded church. For Leo XIV, Castel Gandolfo was not a palace. It was a confessional. Not a seat of rest, but a table of reconciliation. A symbol of humility rediscovered. 10. The Vatican Curia, whispers behind the walls. Within the intricate halls of the Vatican bureaucracy, the visit sparked a range of responses, from awe to discomfort. Cardinal Alessio Marenghi, a longtime member of the Congregation for the Clergy, reportedly expressed admiration, His Holiness teaches more in 1 hour of silence than some do in a decade of speeches. However, not all were pleased. A few prelates felt the visit undermined the symbolic decision of Pope Francis to demystify the residence by opening it to the public. Some feared a reversal, concerned that the Church might fall back into patterns of sacred privilege. But Leo XIV's gestures made it clear, this was not about reclaiming status. It was about reclaiming spirituality. The Pope did not close the villa to tourists. He did not dine in marble halls. He did not stay the night in papal chambers, but rather in a small guest room once reserved for visiting gardeners. It was a deliberate statement: you can honor a place without possessing it. 11. Castel Gandolfo as global metaphor. In the days following the visit, theologians around the world began to publish reflections, drawing rich comparisons between Castel Gandolfo and the Church Universal. Father Elias Mundari, an African theologian from Nairobi, wrote in La Civiltà Cattolica. Castel Gandolfo, like many sacred institutions, had been sidelined as a museum of memory. Pope Leo XIV has now shown it can become a womb of rebirth. This is precisely what he is doing with the Church, turning our relics into gardens. In Latin America, Catholic youth leaders organized prayer vigils using imagery from the visit. In the Philippines, a Carmelite convent started a movement called the Gandolfo Retreat, encouraging clergy to take periodic vows of silence and service for a week each year. It was astonishing. A single visit, without proclamation or papal decree, had kindled a spiritual wildfire across the Catholic world. 12. Echoes of Saint Joseph. Observers began to compare Pope Leo XIV's demeanor at Castel Gandolfo with that of Saint Joseph, the silent guardian of the Holy Family. One nun, Senior Leticia Romero, noted in a televised interview, "Our Pope is becoming the Joseph of the Church. He leads without domination. He shows up without spotlight. He builds without fanfare." This perception added a deeply biblical resonance to the event. Castel Gandolfo became the new Nazareth in the minds of many, a quiet place where the gospel begins again in the ordinary. 13. Renewal for bishops and priests. Days after the visit, Pope Leo XIV sent a private letter to every diocesan bishop around the world. While the Vatican has not released the full content, parts were quoted by bishops in homilies and newsletters. I urge you, dear brothers, to find your own Castel Gandolfo, not in geography, but in spirit. Return to the places where God first called your name. Reclaim the solitude from which real service is born. Several dioceses responded immediately. The Bishop of Sydney suspended administrative meetings for a month, replacing them with prayer retreats. The Archbishop of Chicago turned one wing of the diocesan center into a silent chapel. Bishops in Vietnam and Brazil initiated humble days, where they spend time in slums and villages, following the Pope's pastoral model. 14. A moment of prophetic contrast. What made the visit stand out most starkly was the global contrast. At a time when world leaders gathered in summits flanked by militarized security, economic titans discussed AI over five-star meals, and news cycles churned with political division, Pope Leo XIV chose silence in a garden. No flashy statements. No bold policy. Just a walk, a prayer, a shared meal. And in that contrast, millions saw the soul of Christ echo again in the body of the Church. 15. The last blessing at the gardens. Before departing Castel Gandolfo, Pope Leo XIV did something unexpected. He asked for the doors of the Vatican gardens to be opened, not just to pilgrims, but to anyone, Muslim, atheist, Catholic, or Protestant, who wanted to walk in the shadow of peace. He knelt before a statue of the Virgin Mary near the fountain, prayed the Magnificat aloud, and gave a final blessing, not just to those present, but to the whole world in waiting. Lord, bless those who have forgotten how to hope. Bless the lost priests and forgotten prophets. Bless the elderly left alone and the youth seeking noise to silence their wounds. Bless your world, not because it is holy, but because you are. That moment became the closing image for many Catholic media outlets. A simple pope, alone in the gardens of history, praying for a church that might yet bloom again. Epilogue, a papacy of pilgrimage. Pope Leo XIV's visit to Castel Gandolfo will not be remembered for its ceremonies or its headlines. It will be remembered for its holiness. For its quiet courage to reclaim the sacred from the forgotten. It will be remembered as a moment of humble leadership, the kind of leadership the Church desperately needs in the 21st century. Not one of titles and tribunals, but of presence, silence, and prayer. For in the end, it wasn't the stones of Castel Gandolfo that were consecrated that day. It was us.